Hey guys, what is up? This is Matthew Davis, me once again. Welcome back to another video game review. This time it is going to be on 007 First Light. We haven't gotten a truly good James Bond game. I mean, we've gotten quite a bit of James Bond games, but I feel like when people think James Bond games, they think of one of my all-time favorites, GoldenEye 007 for the N64, which I highly recommend. It's available on modern consoles, specifically Xbox and the Nintendo 64 online thing. But yeah, we're here to talk about First Light, where you play, of course, as James Bond. And in this version of James Bond is much younger. This is kind of like an origin story of James Bond without feeling like it ties into the movie canon, but doing its own thing. It's set in a much more modern time. James Bond isn't exactly good at being a spy, so of course he gets trained to do so, and because of that he has to do various different tasks, like stealth, hitman style, as well as some really brutal combat. Not that the game's M-rated, I mean, it's T-rated, but yeah. Now, like I mentioned before, when it comes to James Bond games, it's really been hard for, people to make a Bond game that's not exactly similar to GoldenEye, but more on the lines of being as good as that. So yeah, there have been good James Bond games afterwards, but there really isn't as many replayable James Bond games as that classic game that we all know and love. And of course, I'm not going to compare this game to that because this game is far more different. But Amazon Studios wanted a game that was much more reminiscent of a full-on James Bond story rather than just, shoot, punch style. So, yeah, there was a lot to this game that, could, potentially live up to, the classic James Bond we all know and love. And while it doesn't quite reach the same level as that, I still think as a James Bond game, it still does an excellent job of recapturing a James Bond story while also doing its own thing. And for the most part, there is a lot to really enjoy about this game. I'm not sure entirely how most James Bond fans are going to feel about the game because it is a very slow-paced game from time to time, and there are moments of padding that definitely do hurt the game just a little bit, but what really saves it is the combat and the gameplay. The gameplay is reminiscent of, using gadgets, specifically like chemical use and shock pens, well, not really pens, more on the lines of, shock use plus chemical use. Though when it comes to using gadgets, you have to gather like specific resources throughout the game in order for you to recharge, which was kind of a bit of a hassle. It was a hassle for me much later on when I'm at this like island or something, this resort. Yeah, resort is the better way I would put it. But still, I can't say that the gadgets were bad. They were very unique from time to time. I just felt like, when it comes to actually using them, they are a little bit underwhelming. I felt like it could have been better if they just used like a recharge feature rather than a gather feature for the gadgets, but the combat is excellent here. The gunplay is reminiscent of just third-person shooting, cover mechanics, so the AI oftentimes gets either very stupid or a little too much from time to time because it's not very well balanced. I'm just going to tell you that. Sometimes they'll just run right into you, or sometimes they won't even aim precisely where you're at. That being said, I still had a lot of fun with it. It is specifically based on, swapping weapons rather than just keeping weapons. You can't upgrade them, but for a game like this, I don't really feel like, that was entirely what they were going for. The style and the graphics are absolutely stellar. This is a gorgeous looking game that definitely does feel reminiscent of a James Bond world and something that you would see similar to in the movies, which is weird because I haven't seen all the James Bond movies. I've only seen like 15% of them, but I do know enough to know where the style of James Bond is supposed to go in a game like this, and I feel like they did an excellent job. And this is just the beginning of a brand new franchise of James Bond games, and I think this is an excellent start, even with some of its faults being very present. Again, one of the biggest things that kind of takes away from the game is its padding. There are times where you're going to be shooting, and then there are other times where you're going to be driving in a very easy, simple, driving section that doesn't really allow you to crash into anything. And but it's not like it's an open world game or anything like that. It still has much better card physics than something like freaking Mind's Eye. And there's a lot of those in that game, but there's very little in here, and I still enjoyed the driving a lot more in this game. But yeah, sometimes throughout the game when it comes to, you know, exploring different environments in order to, you know, progress, yeah, that's where the padding can feel like very, very draggy, and it just has you rolling your eyes just to like, come on, let's get into the action, because I do understand what they're going for. You have to get hints and clues for what exactly you're supposed to do, like a spy would, which I think is very good, but which, yeah, I think is, you know, a good idea, but when adding it to a game, it does relatively feel a little bit too much like a pain to get through, because there are some puzzle-based themes that you have to, you know, do, like, you know, talk to a specific person, then talk to this other person, because sometimes people won't let you in without a pass, and it kind of got repetitive. And that's really my biggest issue with the game. But it didn't really ruin my overall experience, because the story, while nothing super special, is something like you would see in a James Bond film. Because again, what really saves it is the combat. There's two types of combat. There's punching, there's stealth, or three technically: punching, stealth, and gunplay. The punching kind of feels similar to something like Batman Arkham Knight or the Spider-Man games, or like a superhero beat 'em up. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the combat was very excellent. The specific button commands are very on point. Sometimes you could just ram into an enemy and you can just brutally beat them down. It was so much fun to do, and I feel like that's really what saves the game. And it does start off slow when it comes to its combat, but it definitely starts picking up a lot later on, and I feel like that's definitely what works. And the opening sequence was also pretty strong too, definitely reminiscent of a James Bond film, so ultimately for me there is a lot to love for a James Bond fan. I just feel like when it comes to some of the pacing, it's kind of what hurts the game a little bit, but ultimately it never ruined my overall enjoyment for the game, which took me around like 13 hours to beat. And I think this is a strong start for a brand new James Bond game franchise, and if they can make a game somewhat even better than this, then I'm all on board. And in the end, guys, 007 First Light is a very strong first entry in a brand new James Bond franchise, which I have a feeling could end up being better if they learn from this, because this is a very strong start despite some of its faults. I feel like, you know, still for James Bond fans, if you want to feel a lot more like a spy, if you want to feel more like James Bond, this is definitely up your alley. Even though some of the stealth mechanics definitely don't feel a whole lot like stealth mechanics, because sometimes when it comes to, you know, exploring environments, you can beat up enemies without having to rely on stealth. So yeah, people will definitely compare this to something like Hitman. I can't really compare it to that because I never played any of the Hitman games, but I know I'm probably missing out on a whole lot because that's a very popular franchise as well. But yeah, for James Bond, I feel like this is definitely a very, very strong start for an iconic new spy franchise. Gaming franchise, that is. So yeah, if you saw my Pixar rankings video, then you probably know by the end of the video I mentioned that I'm not going to review Toy Story 5 until a few days after it comes out. I am going to be seeing it tomorrow night, but I'm going to wait and review that movie with my friend, Keen. So yeah, just be patient on that, but I promise I'll have that review out as soon as I can get it out for you guys. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and maybe subscribe for more. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or maybe Blue Sky. Links are in the description, and I'll see you guys later. We're out.